Sundari, President of CDSAA, to chair the session, and Professor Keshab, Vice President of CDSAA, to moderate today's session. Over to Professor Sundari.
Dear friends, I'm delighted to welcome all of you this evening to this first event being organized by the recently registered CDS Alumni Association, featuring two distinguished scholars of the CDS community, Professor Raman Mahadevan and Professor Ram Mohan. We hope that this is the first of many more interesting events to come, and we can do that with the active participation of all the alumni in shaping the Alumni Association's activities. I invite all alumni to enroll as members of the Alumni Association. If you have not already done so, the membership form is available on the CDS Alumni webpage. Welcome again to this very interesting evening. I shall now hand over to Keshab Das to introduce the speakers and moderate the book discussion. Over to you, Keshab.
Thank you so very much. It feels like a homecoming. It also feels like a home. I mean, even if it is all online. And as Mridul did point out, to our hairs on the head, either they have grayed or they have become white. Many of us look a little older, but I think in terms of the spirit, in terms of the inquisitiveness, in terms of the fellowship, the solidarity, we are always there with each other. I think the basic idea of the CDS Alumni Association, which we sort of formalized very, very recently, and many of you have joined in. So this is a kind of an event. We are sort of kick-starting with the very distinguished Raman Mahadevan, and with a very, very interesting book, in fact, about which we'll hear from both Ram Mohan and Raman in detail. Of course, there'll be questions, comments, observations from all of you. So what I'll do is I'll very quickly introduce both of them, though I think I'm sort of doing something which is a bit redundant to the audience that I see here. So let me start with Raman Mahadevan. He was my teacher and very, very distinguished business historian. Business and economic historian, let me say, and he had been associated with several institutions, but I think he had very, very early sort of times in JNU, I guess in the 1970s. And I'm referring to JNU for a very special reason, but I think that was also the time when his friends circle included several people who became very, very prominent in the domains of politics, in the domains of history, in the domains of activism. So he sort of grew up and contributed to that community. So we are dealing with a very, very special person, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. He has done excellent work, and his scholarly contribution lies in broad areas of industrial and capitalist development in colonial South India. And his books include Shaping India, Economic Change in Historical Perspective, South Indian Economy, Agrarian Change, Industrial Structure and State Politics, 1914 to 1947, based on a major conference that we had in CDS. And his latest book, about which we are eager to listen to, is Fortune Seekers, A Business History of the Nattukottai Chettiars. So this is a very brief introduction to a very distinguished scholar of our times. I sort of move on to my friend, K T Kammohan, Professor K T Kammohan, let me put it that way. Also a very distinguished economic historian, pursuing sort of his work always in an interdisciplinary political economy, for which he is very well known. He did his PhD from the CDS, and he was also a visiting scholar at the Queen Elizabeth House at the University of Oxford. And he was with the Calcutta Center, the ICSR Center for Studies in Social Sciences. He also was part of CDS for quite some time. He was later the director of the School of Social Sciences and Dean Faculty of Social Sciences at the Mahatma Gandhi University in Kottayam. And his sort of initial work was focused mostly on the material processes and mentalities of development in princely Travancore. And he pursued research in socio-environmental history, exploring labor processes in wetlands cultivation and backwater side craft production. So he also was sort of editing during the 90s the Kerala Pathanangal, what is sort of Kerala studies rather. Then later he also was member of the editorial board of South Indian Studies. He also served as a member of the scientific committee of innovation and development. He has authored books like Krishna Rajinte Patra Margam, the journalistic mission of Krishna Raj, and the Tales of Rice, Kutanad, Southwest India. So he's a very special person in many ways. I would rather now give a brief common introduction to both Raman and Ram Mohan, even as the first three letters they share. Apart from that, I think they're extremely fine human beings, great scholars, and they're always sort of available to anyone for a discussion, formally or informally. So being very bright, being involved, being quite committed to their work. Let's listen to both of them, and let's begin with Raman Mahadevan, please. Raman, please.
Maybe he
Raman?
has to unmute himself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll start. Hello and good evening to all the fellow CDSNs and all other scholars who have tuned into this online book discussion event. At the very outset, let me convey my heartfelt thanks to CDSAA, and in particular, Professor Sundari, Professor Keshab Das, Professor Beena, and all the other executive members of CDSAA for arranging this special book discussion event around my recently published book, The Fortune Seekers. May I also convey my very special thanks to Professor K T Kammohan for happily agreeing to be a discussant of the book. I couldn't have found a better discussant than Ram. As the first event by the newly constituted CDSAA, I deem it an honor and a privilege to be here. And furthermore, it's quite appropriate that CDS is in a way associated with this event. Apart from being very special to me, both professionally and personally, may I say that CDS has had a major role in shaping this book in the manner in which it is today. It is my long years of close interaction and association with my colleagues and students, all of whom are distinguished scholars and economists, which helped me hone my skills as an economic historian, enabling me to pose the kind of research questions required of any scholar such that the book is of some relevance. I am presuming that a good number of you have present today have either read the book or at least managed to go through the excerpts that have appeared in popular magazines such as Mint, Scroll, Outlook, News Minute, and The Print. For those who haven't got around to doing so, I should provide a brief summary of the core arguments of the book. However, before I do this, may I say a few words about the making of the book. It's a book which took shape over a very long span of time because, I'm not one of those who can quickly churn out things. I take my own time. The researching journey commenced as far back as 1973, and the manuscript finally assumed some shape in 2023, 2024. So you can imagine how long this journey has been. In embarking on this journey in early 1970s, it was almost like one of exploring the unexplored. The then prevailing literature was heavily weighted in favor of the principal commercial nodes in Western, Eastern, and Northern India. Uh, Southern India was perceived largely as agricultural and too remote to deserve any serious attention. This was the trigger for me to examine the nature of commercial enterprise in Southern India. And may I say, in my own small way, I have tried to redress this misconception. As they were unquestionably the largest and dominant fraction of South Indian capital, the choice inevitably fell on the Nattukottai Chettiars. The lack of adequate data and information on them in the government archives, and as you all know, I mean, government archives deals with business only when there are some tax matters to be dealt with, or if it concerns permissions required for promoting a mill, or if there is a labor strife or labor unrest, which necessarily involves the engagement of the labor department to the archives really deal seriously with the business class. The lack of adequate data and information in the government archives, in a sense, pushed me into the Chettinad region. This was a game changer for me, as it opened the world of the extremely rich non-archival sources, mostly in the vernacular or Tamil language. I could use some of the material to give shape to my dissertation on the Chettiars. The period of study was the pre-1930 quiescent phase, a phase marked by the emergence of Chettiars as major economic players in the commercialization process in many parts of Southeast Asia. Between the late 1970s and 1990s, my research interests moved to the larger question of understanding of the making of a regional capitalist in the nodal Tamil region of southern India. However, all along and beyond this phase, beyond the 1990s, there was a certain lurking disquiet within me about the manner in which the history of the Chettiars had been depicted thus far. You may be surprised to know that the Chettiars as a community have been a milch cow in as much as over a dozen dissertations have been submitted so far, or more, in fact, more than a dozen dissertations all across, not just in India, but all across the world, focusing primarily on the pre-1930 period, largely because of two very important source materials. These were the Madras Provincial Banking Inquiry Committee report and the Burma Provincial Banking Inquiry Committee report. Sorry, both these reports, it was part of the All India Banking Inquiry, Central All India Banking Inquiry Committee report for regions. The idea was basically to look into this problem of that the peasants faced in securing credit from the unorganized money market, and the need to, in a sense, streamline and rationalize the unorganized credit market. That was basically the goal of these committees, and these were very useful. Most of these studies have really focused on these two reports, which were in fact extremely useful and very interesting. I'm not denying the importance of this, but I therefore chose to revisit the Chettiars during this period, focusing on the neglected post-1930 period. That was one of intense turbulence and churn, economically, socially, and politically. And I decided to closely investigate and examine how they adapted to these conditions. The period from 1930 to 1950 was one of fast-paced socio-economic and political transformation and upheaval, which majorly destabilized the traditional banking structure and modes of operation. It compelled the Chettiars, both as a community as well as individual members, to come to terms with the emerging situation and harsh reality, and to adjust, accommodate, and diversify as best as they could. This critical aspect, which has not received the attention it deserves in the existing literature, has been the focus of my work in one sense. Now, briefly about the book. This book really looks at the historical journey of probably the most prominent business community of South India. The study was basically informed by the larger conceptual issue of the making of regional capital in South India. By virtue of being the most prominent fraction of South Indian capital, one chose to look closely and critically on the nature of entrepreneurship within this community. Broadly, the book focuses on the historical journey of the business community from the late 19th century to the immediate post-independence period. It focuses not only on the much researched pre-1930 phase of the migration of Chetty capital to the overseas regions of Southeast Asia to take advantage of the colonial commercialization process and the attendant wealth accumulation, but more significantly, it also focuses on the Depression and the post-Depression period, including the Second World War and beyond, and the manner in which it affected the fortunes of the community. It is also about the transformation and the diversification of the community and of the breakdown of old business and social networks. I shall now take up a few issues which I think are important.
Helen, I think you have to mute. Sorry, Raman, please go ahead.
Yeah. I shall take this opportunity to dwell upon a few analytical issues that emerge from this book, but also resonates beyond the book. I refer to the question of transition and diversification from banking and trade to investment in modern industry. The question that is often posed in the context of the historiography of the social roots of industrial investment in colonial India is as follows. Why did the Chettiars not display the alacrity and the aggressive instincts in seizing opportunities for investment in industry in the manner in which the Marwadis, the Gujarati Baniyas, and the Parsis, among others, did? This is an issue that is well known and has been commented upon at length. However, what I wish to discuss here is the inter-regional variations as well as the inter-business community variations in entrepreneurial response. Thus, as it was observed, a good number of the members of the business community from Western, Eastern, and Northern India chose to channelize part of their investable surplus into modern industry in the 1920s and 30s, following the introduction of tariff protection and into a number of consumer goods industries such as textile, sugar, paper. However, down south, the Chettiars were not found to be emulating this path on a scale comparable to those elsewhere in India. In this context of diversification, a recent study has compared the entrepreneurial and investment behavior of the Marwadis with those of the Chettiars and has boldly advanced the following arguments to explain the lethargic response of the Chettiars. It has been argued by the scholar that the Chettiars lost out because of their weak ties with foreign capital, as well as a lack of exposure to Western business. Number two, the scholar argues, over-engagement with agricultural credit and the lack of economic diversification rendered it difficult to adjust to changing commercial conditions, especially after the Depression. Weak hinterland linkages also were a factor in their inability to move into industry. Propensity to work on their own rather than tie up with others was also a factor in constraining diversification into industry. In addressing this issue, in the background of the arguments that have been advanced, our study tends to provide a more nuanced picture, a more nuanced perspective. It may be worthwhile to delve into this. Following the Depression and the attendant severe economic crisis reflected in the steep fall in the prices of primary products, the Chettiars, as the principal purveyors of credit, found themselves in a situation where they had no option but to seize the pledged collateral when the debtors were unable to repay their loans. Thus, in a matter of no time, Chettiar capital was locked up or frozen into immovable assets in the form of land, plantation, tin mines, urban property, etc. Given the depressed value of these assets right up to almost the end of 1930s, there was a reluctance, and quite naturally so, to dispose of the assets at the depressed levels. There was an abiding hope that things would look up and there would be a turnaround, enabling them to recoup some of the losses incurred during the depression. The point that I'm making was the question of diversification in the 1930s doesn't arise because much of the capital was locked up in immovable assets. I mean, if the situations were different, I mean, that's counterfactual. I don't know how they would have responded. I mean, this needs to be factored in. That unfortunately didn't happen as the Second World War broke out and the Japanese overran much of Southeast Asia, including Burma, and played spoil sport and completely derailed and jeopardized vital Chettiar interests. That happens between 1941, 42, and until the end of 14. The major factor in deterring Chettiar capital from repatriating the capital, especially in the late 1930s, prior to the outbreak of the war, was also the taxation policy of the government of India, which categorized proceeds from the sale of their assets as profits and thus liable for taxation. This acted as a deterrent in facilitating the repatriation of Chettiar capital into southern India. Yet another disincentive of sorts was the near oversaturation of investment in the industrial sector, especially in textiles, in the 1930s, thus contributing to the lowering of profitability levels in industry. You see, by the 1936-37, the textile industry, there were already complaints of oversaturation. You know, the Kammohan had and the Gounders had invested majorly in the textile industry during this period, at a time when you know, capital costs were lower. So by the late 30s, what you notice is that the capital costs are going up. There's also labor costs are going up. There's growing labor militancy. So these are the kind of factors that, had the Chettiars wanted to diversify in the, say, late 30s, which they didn't, these were the kind of factors, conditions which they had to contend with. Prior to 1930, the returns on investment through banking in the overseas was significantly higher than that in industry. And therefore, there was really no particular allurement for them to move from banking to industry. The other conceptual issue that my research threw up and which is referred to in this book and which needs more debate is one relating to the nature of investment. I mean, the Chettiars do move into industry in a big way, really only after, in the 40s and post 40s, particularly at a time when you know, it was extremely profitable to invest in industry. This is not to suggest that there was no investment in industry prior to 1940. There was, but in relation to other business communities, you find that it is not very significant, or in relation to you know, the total investment in textile industry, it is not very significant. Of course, there were people who, in fact, the first textile industry, probably the first textile industry by a South Indian was the Malabar spinning mills with which the Chettiars were associated. There were then subsequently in 1905 you have another major Chettiar group, the ALAR group, investing in the Kalishwara mills, which was again possibly the outcome of the Swadeshi movement and the growing demand for Swadeshi products. There are a number of other Chettiars who acquired textile mills and paper mills and sugar mills in the course of as bankers, when the promoters of these mills were unable to repay the loan, the Chettiars seized control over these enterprises and ran them. But the major sort of flow, shall we say, and there were others, like a few others who were not into banking. So this is a very interesting sort of trend that you notice, that there are a few groups who were exclusively, actually much of the capital was in trade rather than in banking. These are the Chettiars who were involved, engaged with, whose investments were largely in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, in Ceylon, rather than in Burma and Malaysia. So the Karumuthu Chagara Chettiar group, who was later to emerge as one of the major textile industrialists in South India, is a good example of this kind, who was really, his family firm was initially importing textile products from Manchester. And later, of course, they set up their own mill in Madura to take on this very powerful A&F Harvey Madura group, Ports Group. So the point that I'm making is that, but the major investment really happens only in the 1940s, when it is extremely profitable for them to invest in textiles. So you see the MCT group investing, acquiring the 6 Elphinstone mills in Bombay. Then you have the investment by the same group of the Travancore rayons in Perumbavoor in Kerala in 1946. And even the Rajasar Annamalai group, which kept away from very rigidly kept away from investing in industry, chose to acquire a silk mill in 1944-45, when it was really profitable to do so. The Lotus mills, which they acquired, and made good profit in the process. So all this happens in the 40s. Now, the other conceptual issue that my research threw up, and which is referred to in this book and which needs more debate, is one relating to the nature of investment portfolio of the Chettiars and of investment behavior itself. Thus, there were quite a few instances wherein Chettiar business houses chose to follow up their primary investment in modern textile in the spinning sector by investment in handlooms rather than in a composite modern mill. The point that I'm making is that they chose to invest in a handloom rather than in a composite modern mill where they could produce both yarn and cloth. Clearly, the impulse for it was the presence of a very large profitable market for such handloom products among the diasporic Tamil people of Ceylon, Burma, and Malaya. So you find Alagappa Chettiar promoting the Cochin textiles and Alagappa textiles, very modern spinning units in Alvai, and followed by a handloom, by acquiring control over a handloom unit in Kannur. This happens in the 40s. Likewise, Karumuthu Tyagaraja Chettiar, who set up the Madura, the Meenakshi mills, and acquires a whole lot of mills in the 40s, rather than investing in a composite mill where he could produce cloth, chooses to set up within the premises of the Meenakshi mill, sets up a huge handloom unit, engages handloom weavers and converts yarn into handloom cloth. And there is the Jawahar mills, M.A. Palniyappa Chettiar does the same. So there are 3 or 4 such instances of Chettiars investing in handlooms after having invested in modern textiles. This is that variance with the expected entrepreneurial behavior of modern capitalists. Should this be perceived as hangover or persisting weight of commercial traits of capital, or as making the most of the situation in the context of the specific colonial conditions prevailing in southern India? The other issue, not unrelated to this, was the investment in tertiary sector being perceived as unproductive in relation to industrial investment. I mean, you find that much of the Chettiar capital in retreat, especially in the 1930s, from whatever little capital they could manage to garner in Malaya or in Burma, not very much, because much of it was locked up in immobile assets, found its way into the tertiary sector in the form of modern uh, insurance companies, modern banks, small unscheduled banks. Uh, uh, um, can you just put off this and this? Uh, 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 Stockbroking firms, uh, and other such, sort of establishments in the tertiary sector, or transport companies, cinema distributing companies, rather than in manufacturing. So it is in this context that this issue needs to be discussed, whether capital which moves in from, usury and money lending to modern tertiary sector, bypassing manufacturing, is it unproductive capital? Is it not pure capital? Is an issue which needs to be discussed. Okay. So I think there is, I will stop here because there is enough sort of food for thought and for us to chew and continue. I'd rather we took up some of these and other issues and discuss. And now may I leave it to the discussant and others to take over.
Thank you so very much, Raman. I think you have given a very, very interesting, at least some brief notes, and particularly the 30s and 40s. And I think it's really interesting times in terms of sort of getting out of certain kinds of business and also investing mostly in textiles, as you mentioned. But then you also hinted at kind of very different kinds of entrepreneurship that they displayed, not to be confused with the way the Marwadis or the Parsis or the Banyas might have behaved. So this is probably a very special class. And let's listen to Ram Mohan, the chief discussant, please.
Thank you very much, Das, for the generous introduction. It is indeed a privilege to discuss this wonderful work of scholarship by Professor Raman Mahadevan. I sincerely thank the Alumni Association, especially Dr. Sundari Ravindran and Dr. Keshab Das, and of course, Professor Mahadevan for providing me with this opportunity. Equally a pleasure to see so many friends here. Hello to you all. The life of a trader is not easy. Unlike the peasant,
I request, sorry, Ramon, I request all of you to keep your mics mute. And yeah, so only Ramon speaks, no one else.
The life of a trader is not easy. Unlike the peasant, the artisan, and the manufacturing worker, a trader is not viewed as belonging to the productive class. Neither does a trader command respect like other service sector personnel, such as teachers and doctors. Particularly low is the status of money lenders. They are seen as parasites. If based in a foreign land, the lives of traders and money lenders are even less easy. In establishing contacts and winning confidence of clientele, a diaspora faces greater challenge than locals. The differences in language and culture are serious deterrents to communication. They are targets of mistrust and envy, if not outright hostility. All kinds of stories are woven around them. They may be reduced to pawns in the local power games. The vagaries of regional and global politics may pose threats not only to their economic activity, but life itself. The book before us today traces the trajectory of a prominent mercantile diaspora, the Nattukottai Chettiars, who were traders and money lenders in South and Southeast Asia. Their ancestral headquarters is the southern part of the present Tamil Nadu. It was a small group, counting a little over 40,000 in 1921. An overwhelming majority was entrepreneurs, as the book states, as high as 90%. The community first migrated to Calcutta, soon spread across the Indian Ocean to Ceylon, and later beyond the Bay of Bengal to Burma, Singapore, and Malaya. Through a network of agents and sub-agents, the Chettiar firms reached into the interior. The offshoots of their capital touched even French Indochina and Dutch East Indies. Interestingly, as in the case of the Tatars, opium trade was a source of early accumulation for Chettiars. The study activates the framework of political economy to lay out accumulation processes. Among other strengths, this helps to factor in internal class differentiation, an aspect often missed in business histories of communities. Forming the larger background to Chettiar accumulation was the colonization of Asia. This was primarily manifested in the development of plantation, mining, and logging industries catering to the world metropolis. It also necessitated an increased production of food for workers in the expanding non-food producing sectors. Under these conditions, trade hugely expanded, and so did the demand for credit. The Chettiars got involved in all these, that is, export of plantation and mineral produce from the colonies to the core, circulation of food within the colonies and partly involving the core, and financing such activities. Further, the Chettiar moneylenders acquired assets of defaulting debtors, thereby making forays into production. The Chettiar moneylenders funded agriculture on the security of land and promissory notes and supported foreign trade by discounting bills of exchange. Trade finance often involved currency exchange and transfer. For instance, in Ceylon, the Chettiars discounted traders' receivables for export of coffee to the metropolis and payables for import of rice from India, settling the net difference. In doing so, besides using own funds, they availed themselves of refinance from foreign banks. Likewise, in Burma, the banks loaned funds to the Chettiar moneylenders who relent it to the peasants. Similar was the dynamics of Chettiar lending activity in Malaya and others. Seemingly, this was a win-win situation. While foreign banks could shift the risk of bad debts to Chettiars, the latter profited by charging a loan interest higher than the borrowing rate, and the native peasants gained access to funds. The net outcome, however, was the conversion of subsistence peasant economies to cash crop economies and their subsumption under international capitalism. As traders and moneylenders, the Chettiars played a key role in this global integration. The process primarily favored metropolitan accumulation and next intermediary Chettiar accumulation, leaving the local peasants high and dry. The Chettiar heyday, as the book observes, was the period between the two world depressions, that is, the 1870s and the 1930s. Beginning from the 1940s, beleaguered by the depression, national liberation struggles and war, the Chettiars were forced to beat a retreat. As a major chunk of the assets was land, they could bring back to India only a fraction of the riches. A section of the community, however, had built a robust economic base back home through trading and banking and by drawing on overseas surplus. Besides, vast tracts had come to certain Chettiars with local zemindaris failing to pay back their debts. Some of the wealthy Chettiars diversified into industry, including cinema, and also established educational institutions which facilitated the growth of a professional class from within the community. Those who failed to diversify, and they formed a majority, lost the game. The book suggests that the trajectory of Chettiar capital contrasts with that of other business communities, to quote, for the manner in which the community soared to great heights, but then eventually went off the radar. What especially distinguishes the present book from most other works in business history is its eye for anthropological details. As it emerges from the book, the Chettiar diaspora successfully established itself as a self-governing community anchored on shared values of trust, cooperation, and protection. The community comprised 9 clans representing 9 original urban settlements, each clustered around a temple. Temples were built in immigrant territories also. The Chettiar temples were both accumulators and distributors of economic surplus. Each household paid a levy to the temple. Also, the temples received large endowments of land and money. The clan members were extended loans out of temple funds. The interest rates, lower than the bank rate, were decided by the temple committee. Besides extending loans, the temples invested in firms linked to the clan. In making the Chettiars a strong mercantile community, equally important was the specific form and norms of family. 3 or 4 generations lived under the same roof. Boys as young as 9 years were rigorously trained in mental arithmetic, including fractions. As soon as he reached teens, the apprenticeship started. This equipped him to head a branch of the family firm. With help from extended family, he could mobilize seed capital. The intra-caste credit network kept him going. The book states that, alongside economic factors, the weakening of community ties led to the decline of the Chettiar business empire. Well, this is all from Raman's book, what I have been reading out. Such is the story, in a nutshell, of the rise and fall of the community, which the book narrates with great elan. Many parts of the text yield a visual treat. The book, for instance, talks about Chettiar mansions with, to quote, magnificent inner courtyards, Burma teak and Ceylonese satinwood pillars, door and ceilings, a mix of Italian marble and local ornamental Athangudi floor tiles, besides Belgian mirrors and stained glass. This strikes a sharp contrast with later days when Chettiars were driven to quote, not only pledging their valuables, but even to stripping their homes of their teak doors and frames in order to support their families. Equally evocative is the author's description of the Chettiar exodus from Burma. While firmly set within the discipline of business history, the charming style of writing helps the book to move beyond a select audience to the larger public. Most importantly, the enchanting narrative is accomplished without compromising on scientific rigor. The book strictly adheres to the cardinal principles of empirical historiography, meaning all observations are based on definite sources. Any gap in information arising from lack of dependable sources is allowed to remain. And speculative remarks are appropriately flagged. The objective of the study being a situated history of capitalism, the analysis is specific and concrete, with its emphasis on the forms of accumulation rendered possible by a particular set of institutions, norms and practices, and as identifiable with definite historical periods. I would think that the analysis closely corresponds to the concept of regime of accumulation as advanced by the Marxian school of regulation theories. The book is such a captivating read that it tempts us to ask for more. The study rightly cites the closely knit organization of the community as a major source of its economic strength. I wonder whether there were negative aspects too associated with such an organization. Did it isolate the community from the host society and pose difficulties in making allies who could have helped them in adverse political times? Another set of queries relate to the developments back home. The book talks about the patriarchal structure of the Chettiar joint family. One would have liked to know more about the role of women in the Chettiar regime of accumulation. Save dowry adding to capital, was their role entirely confined to providing household support? With their husband or father abroad for varying periods of time, did the women who were left behind engage in mercantile or money-lending transactions, however small? Was there an unreported economy of women? Also, the failure of Chettiars to take off in post-independent India raises curiosity. The book cites lack of diversification as the prime reason behind this. Partly this is attributed to the diffidence of the Chettiars, who lacked a steady track record in industry in competing with other communities. By the time the Chettiars returned to India, others had risen to dominance in the modern manufacturing sector. Even as this is true, a more complete picture could perhaps ensue if one were to investigate the linkages of big Indian capital and the state. Importantly, the dominance of big capital was not confined to the economic realm. Firmly established in the polity, it had dared to advance an economic plan for the whole country, the so-called Bombay Plan, by the mid-1940s. Were the Chettiars excluded from post-independent state apparatus owing to their limited role in the formation of the nation-state. The big Chettiar capitalists, as the book observes, identified more with the Justice Party than the Indian National Congress. To what extent did the possible biases of the new state prevent the Chettiars from attaining the much-needed takeoff? Well, if the answers to these queries are either explicitly or implicitly stated in the book and I missed this, I may be kindly pardoned. Let me close my comments by noting that the trajectory of Chettiar capital, as narrated in the book, reminded me of Arnold Toynbee's hypothesis of challenge and response. Toynbee argues that civilizations rise as a response to challenge. Growth is driven by creative minorities who take on the task. They inspire others to follow their innovative lead. Importantly, Toynbee cautions that challenge shall be reasonable. Too little challenge would cause a civilization to stagnate, while excessive challenge will crush it. The eventual decline of a rising civilization occurs when the earlier dynamic minority ceases to be creative and becomes incapable of addressing new challenges. In a way, the Chettiar story seems to fall in line with Toynbee's hypothesis. Thank you all.
Thank you so very much, Ramon. I think nothing less was expected. And I think your discussion was remarkable in many ways, partly because of its analysis, its references to larger theoretical context, your very sharp questions to Raman, whether you found those answers in the book or not. And I think in terms of sort of like bringing up a lot of details which Raman did not mention, because maybe he will say much of that when we have this question answer session. So thank you so very much, Rammohan. And now the floor is open. So I have a little request, and I know this is the CDS crowd, so there'll be many questions. And the only request is please be precise and ask or make a comment or suggest, agree, disagree, whatever. But time, please be very, very brief. Thank you so very much. So anyone wants to ask, please go ahead. Yeah. Yes, please. Anyone, yeah. You may please ask.
That's can I go with this, Vijay Shankar?
Yeah, please.
Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Raman, for a brilliant presentation of this much awaited book. We have been waiting for it. You have been waiting for it to be published. We are waiting to be come out so that we can read it. It's a pleasure to read. I procured a copy of the book and I read it thoroughly enjoyed it. And thanks, Raman, for your excellent comments. Some of what I'm going to ask also overlaps with what you have raised, some of the issues that you have raised. My first question was about caste-based, what you call the traditional community-based intra-caste credit system, which allowed Chettiars to become world conquerors, not only in India, South India, even go to the extent of Southeast Asia and other places. So what did, and you also mentioned that this system could not take the changes of the post-war, post-1930s thing. The system was not flexible. Why was it so inflexible? That's my question. The system was so robust to take them, carry them through for about 50 years, more than 100 years. Why did it suddenly not able to adapt to a new situation? And proceeding from that, why didn't the Chettiars think of some other ways of doing things apart from this community-based credit networks? As you rightly mentioned, many of them moved into industrial investment. Some of them, this Alagappa group, the Leather King and the Textile King that you mentioned, Karumuttu, etc. And they also did investments in agriculture, acquired landed property and invested in agriculture. So if they could all that, why did the system not evolve, co-evolve along with their investment priorities? That is my first question. Second is, in the book, I found a reference to the stiff competition from Marwadis, Multanis, and other people, which forced Chettiars sort of move out of South India and focus more on areas outside India. I did not find any mention of that in your presentation, so I was just wondering why that aspect was not mentioned. That's my second point. Third is regarding the portfolio of Chettiar investments. If you look at Chettiar investments, a lot of Alagappa, Murugappa, those people we mentioned, and Karumuttu Chettiar, etc., some of them have invested in industry and some of them have moved into agriculture. So in terms of overall portfolio, if you look at it, what is the proportion of industrial investment? You mentioned it is not very significant, but is that really so for the group as a whole? And secondly, what is the kind of involvement that they have done in other sectors outside industry and agriculture, which is basically the tertiary capital? I'll just come to that in a moment. I have one more question.
I think Vijay Shankar, I think we have to be very brief. There may be others.
Yes,
please.
yes. Yeah, I have only one more question. The fourth question is about the tertiary capital. You mentioned a very exciting topic. I myself been thinking about it. I had a conversation with you as well. What are the forms of tertiary capitals that Chettiar investments have taken? And in terms of their overall portfolio, how significant that is? I think I would stop there. Thank you, Das, for stopping me. I could have gone on because the book is so exciting. I have so many more questions. Anyway,
no, in a meeting, time is a common property resource. I have learned from CDS actually.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So anyone, maybe Raman, you takes a few more questions and then get back, or as you like. Yeah. Any other questions, please, so that Raman can pick up a few together and yeah, please.
It's Mridul. It's not a question. It's actually reiterating what Ram Mohan said. What about the women in those families? And was there intermarriage in that, or was it a very close community? That's another very simple thing which came to my mind. And quickly, one more question was at the time when one was discussing the spinning sector, there was always this question: why the spinning sector? Why in the south only spinning mills came up, not the composite mills? So, is there any answer to that? That why did we have all the spinning mills concentrated in Coimbatore, for instance, a whole lot of them, but they were not composite mills? So, what was the reason behind that? And just a question I would like to be answered.
Maybe one more question we'll take, and then Raman can answer. Anyone else, please? Maybe Raman, you could probably respond to this set of questions, and then we'll have another round. Yeah, please, Raman.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll start with Mridul, and because part of it, in a sense, coincides with Ram also. I'll start with the question regarding the position of women. You see, it was a typically patriarchal sort of community. There was no intermarriage. I mean, you couldn't marry from the same clan. You had to marry, the woman had to be from one of the, there were 9 temple clans, clans revolving around the temple. So you couldn't marry from the same temple clan. You had to marry from a different clan. That was, of course, absolutely essential. In that sense, it was a very close community. But the woman had to manage the household while it's not as though the men were away. The men were also around. It was really a system which was managed by the agents. They had the agency system where agents were appointed from the not so well endowed families, from the, shall we say, the uh, lower middle class Chettiar families. The agents were recruited from there for a period of 3 years. So, but while the men did go out to oversee some of the branches, then the women, of course, took care of the household. But more importantly, whatever money they got, by way of, at the time of a wedding, bride price, that was invested in the Chettiar firm. See? So, so Ram, to respond to your question, yes, they didn't have they didn't manage the firms. The firms were managed by the men. They didn't have a share in the property either. But whatever money that they received at the time of marriage, that was very prudently invested in Chettiar firms. And the income that they received from that was used by them for other sort of purposes like weddings and other things. Mridul, then I'll come back to Ram again. Mridul, I'll finish your question. As regards the spinning sector, this is the reason why there was a preponderance of the spinning mills in South India, especially in Coimbatore and other parts of Tamil Nadu, was the symbiotic relation with the presence of the large handloom sector, thriving handloom sector. So the yarn found a very easy market in the form of handlooms. And the handlooms itself were highly diversified, you had the emergence of power loom by the late 40s and early 50s. So the spinning sector, in a sense, fed the handloom sector, So that's the reason why you have fewer composite mills in South India as compared to other parts of India. Sorry?
You talked about.
Sorry?
You said saturation of the textile industry. Did it have something to do with that? Or was it too early? I mean, that was too early a period. Okay, but don't answer it. It's all right. You go ahead with.
Saturation had to do also with the imports of the cheaper Japanese yarn. So the South Indian market was getting flooded by one, of course, all these mills which came up between 1928, 29, and right up to 1934, 35. The South Indian textile industry experiences a boom. There's a boom in investment at this point, largely agro-commercial capital which moves in. But they're obviously not in a position at this point of time to, really assess how big the market is. And the complexity arose out of the fact that you had imports of Japanese yarn as well, and yarn from other areas as well, other regions of India. So, so with the result, by the late 30s, that is what I meant by oversaturation. So the profits were coming. This is quite noticeable when you look at the balance sheet data of some of these mills, So the profits are coming down by 37, 38. Yeah, that's what I meant. Now to respond to Vijay Shankar, you talked about why did the traditional system not adjust to the 1930s? I mean, you see, the problem is, Shankar, there was a major liquidity crisis which the system faced, when the moment the prices sharply plummeted, and so the Chettiars had no option but to seize the collateral in that kind of situation. So there was a major liquidity crisis, and but even prior to that, I think I mentioned that in my book, that the first signs of the crisis were evident as far back as 1925-26, when the problem started in Ceylon, when the prices of coffee and price of tea started falling, and that affected the Chettiar firms at this point, and quite a few firms collapsed at this point of time, including the ARARSM and the ALAR, two very large firms. These were Adati firms. These were firms which were in fact, in a sense, supporting the other firms. So that's the reason why this is something which they did not anticipate. So once that happened, so you see a certain reorganization happening. The Chettiars is moving away from some of the large firms, like I mentioned, the Raja Annamale Chettiar and the MCT Chidambaram Chettiar. These two very large Adati firms were moving out of the system. They set up joint stock companies. I mean, you have the Chettinad Bank and the MCTM Banking Corporation, which comes up. So they're exiting from this traditional banking system, because they realized that it could affect them as well. So they wanted to insulate themselves from any possible crisis which would affect the whole system and affect them as well. So that was very clear from as far back as 1929. In fact, even before the major depression broke out, they had already exited. As far as the Chettiar investment portfolio is concerned, you see, the tertiary sector, what you notice is it's predominantly in the banks. They set up modern banks. See, even in the late 1920s and all that, you have this Chettiar association where many of these leading Chettiars are making a plea to their fellow Chettiars that, it's time that we decided to, change with changing times and move into set up modern joint stock banks, So what you notice is that there are a lot of these small banks which are coming up, investment companies, investment corporations, stockbroking firms. That's one area. And then, of course, insurance companies, and of course, cinema and other, and trading companies, in fact. For instance, you take the case of Raja Sir Annamale Chettiar, that's one of the biggest groups. They set up this a trading company, South India Corporation, which was essentially dealing with import-export trade, in various commodities. So, as regards the question of stiff competition from Marwadis and Multanis, and you refer to my not bringing that up. The fact is that I'm referring to the period in the 19th century. You see, that is what the period when they were moving out of South India to Southeast Asia. So I brought this up as one of the factors which, in a sense, encouraged them to move out of India. Apart from other factors, the fact that acquiring land.
Mr. Siram, you have to mute. You have to someone this meeting. Please mute your speaker, please.
I don't think it was a major factor, this competition from Marwadis and Multanis. Marwadis were mainly in the Tirupur cotton market, So Chettiar presence in the cotton market was not so significant. Multanis, yes, as bankers in Coimbatore. But in fact, the Chettiars continue to operate, perhaps not on the scale on which they did in Southeast Asia. But it's not as though they were not associated during this period. I'm referring to the pre-depression period in South at all. I mean, in the Tanjore belt, they were quite active in financing rice production and rice trade. They were quite actively involved, set up a lot of rice mills as well. So I wouldn't say, I don't think there was any major competition later on. I was referring to the 19th century, mid-19th century, when the scale of operational Chettiars was not so big. At that point of time, this may have been a factor in inducing them to move out. Any other question? Yeah. So
No, that's all. I had only that many.
yeah.
I think there is some comment or observation by Arvind in the chat box, and then of course we'll listen to Gita's questions. So Arvind, you want to ask, or you want me to read out or something?
Yeah, Ram,
Arvind,
any other question you had in mind? I mean,
It's a clarification. That's it's okay.
yeah.
yeah, but why don't you ask that, Arvind?
Basically, I see that in many parts of the country, I mean, in some parts at least, the money lenders acquired land, made money through credit, profit on by providing credit, but they also acquired land and they resold that land. And the major part of their money came from that reselling of that land. And that is what added to their accumulation, at least from what I've seen a little bit or read a little bit. I haven't read the book, so I didn't want to. So I was wondering whether the land locked up by the Chettiars in Burma actually froze all their accumulation, if that was the...
The compensation that was offered, the very protracted negotiation that went on. Some members of the Chettiar community, very influential members, were close to the then political establishment, especially Aung San. And negotiations were going on, but unfortunately, one of them was assassinated. One of the members who was closely involved in the negotiation with the Burmese political system, the then political system, to get some kind of a compensation for. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and so eventually, they passed the subsequent government political establishment passed the land nationalization bill, whereby all the land was forcibly taken, appropriated by the state itself. You see, so no compensation was got. So in that, so this affected different firms differently. That's the argument that I make. It affected the smaller firms very badly, the smaller and mid-sized firms who had not diversified and whose investments were largely in Burma, not elsewhere. But there were some firms who had investments across Southeast Asia, in Burma, in Malaysia, in Indochina, and possibly in parts of Sumatra and Indonesia. No, those firms did slightly better. So they were able to, especially those in Malaya were able to sell their land, the rubber estates essentially, or tin mines. They were able to sell them, perhaps not for the price which they would have wished, but the situation was such in the late 40s, when the tide had turned against them, and politically also it wasn't very prudent for them to stay on. They did sell their land. Likewise, in southern India also, many of the Chettiars who had acquired land through money lending did dispose of that land and were able to. Now, you see, the problem, Arvind, is that in doing this kind of history, data is very difficult to access. In fact, charting the history of even a firm is extremely difficult, for economic historians, because that kind of data is not available. I was slightly more lucky because I had access to the Burma Nattukottai Chettiars Association papers, which were lying there, and they didn't know what the value and worth of that, So I managed to lay my hands not on all of it, a certain set of papers, which proved to be useful. But otherwise, it's very difficult to get that kind of data, firm level data, regarding sale of land and what happened to that money so acquired, where did it get channelized? That kind of data is very difficult to really acquire.
No, thanks. I'll just make one comment. Just a comment. The story of Chettiars reminds me exactly of how the story of the Punjab National Bank. You see, Punjab National Bank gets set up in Lahore exactly through traders and the others. So therefore, trading capital moving into banking, and if you remember Jagat Seth of the medieval period, this is a very firm base. So it's they're actually following trajectories which have very strong roots.
They're very
let's listen to
Thank
Geeta,
you.
please, and then so let's take Geeta and Nagra's question together, and then Raman may reply. Geeta, please.
Thanks, Keshab. First of all, Raman, congratulations
Hi, Geeta.
on
Thanks.
getting the book out. I was counting your years, and half a century
That's
to
right.
final production is. But I'm delighted that it's out. I have not read it, but I definitely look forward to getting it and reading it. Also, congratulations to Keshab, Sundari, and everybody else in getting the association going in this way. This is very good. My question, however, is Raman, is one about the, and I think it was Ram Mohan or someone else who raised this, is this question of the relationship of the Chettiars to the Justice Party and the how much of their inability to prosper as much as other communities pre and post independence. Whoever is Sriram, please mute yourself.
Yeah, Sriram, Mr. Sriram, you have to mute. Mr. Sriram, you have to mute. Mr. Sriram.
Very disturbing coming in the middle. Many times you've done that. Please mute your mic.
Keshav, you can't mute him or her, whoever it is.
Maybe Emmanuel, if you can do that, that would be good.
Control, you can mute everybody.
Please. Geeta, please go.
So wherever I was, I think my question was about caste and the state, and the fact that the Chettiars were very closely aligned to the Justice Party. Oh my goodness.
Can you mute that? Is it possible to?
And whether the fact that the Justice Party as the precursor for the DK and all of the anti-Brahmin parties that followed was in a sense on the wrong side of the state and the relationship to the state, and did they lose out in that process from getting the support of the state for investments and industry? I don't know if you've talked about this in your book, or even if not, if you have some ideas, it'd be interesting.
Thanks, Geeta, for that. It ties up with Ram's question also. Now, I haven't gone at length into the relationship between. I deliberately decided to, keep that out of the focus of my work, because it is essentially I was looking at the more the economic, social, and cultural aspects rather kept out, and this is a major area which I haven't addressed. Not directly, indirectly I have, but I have talked about it elsewhere. One is insofar as the relationship between the Chettiars and the then prevailing political systems that were emerging. It's a very complex issue, Geeta. I mean, one can't generalize for the whole community. You do find that some sections of the upper crust of the Chettiar community, and in particular, I refer to the Rajasar Annamale Chettiar group, and possibly the Murugappa group at that point of time, were funding the Justice Party. Now, if you look at the Justice Party itself, I mean, I can't claim to be an expert in the political history of Tamil Nadu or of India, so I would be very wary of making any. I shouldn't be mistaken for making sweeping statements, but I would like to make a distinction between the Justice Party as it existed in the pre-1930 period, that is the period from 1915 when it came into being, and 1930, that phase, and the post-1930 phase when you have E.V. Ramaswamy Naicker, who was actually a congressman. He was a hardcore congressman, and it is much later, after his visit to Soviet Union, that and he was a very radical congressman. Unlike the other congressmen of that time, he was a very radical congressman, and he decided to leave Congress and move and join the Justice Party. So one needs to make a distinction between the earlier Justice Party and the later Justice Party, number one. Number two, there were quite a few Chettiars who were closely associated with the Congress Party, you know, in as much as the meetings when Gandhiji visited Tamil Nadu and Coimbatore in particular, the venue was a mill controlled by the mill owner, and the Chettiars were also present. So, one can't make. But you are right. But towards the 40s and 50s, two things are happening. One is that there is a South Indian Commercial and Industrial Conference which is held in Chennai under the auspices of the South Indian Chamber of Commerce. And among the resolutions that were passed in that conference, very significant conference, one of them refers to this whole notion of regionalization of industry, that, you know, they wanted some kind of a protection for South Indian industry. There was a fear that the more developed sections of Indian capital from Western India and from Eastern India might sort of swamp them, you know. So there was this call for, shall I say, South for South Indians. So the very early sort of, you know, shall I say, ideation or crystallization of this idea that they need protection within the Indian Union, you know. I mean, what the Muslim capital did to, I'm not saying that, there are shades of it, you see, in that, I mean, after all, I mean, I was going to actually do work on the economic basis of partition, but I ended up working on Chettiars. So I am quite familiar with that issue. It is very interesting the manner in which from the 40s, large sections of Muslim quote unquote capital threw in their lot with Muslim League, because they felt, and there is evidence to this effect, that they felt that in a post-independent India, the Hindus would be marginalized by the quote unquote Hindu capital. So likewise, there was this fear in the South Indian Chamber of Commerce, which was largely dominated by the Chettiars. I mean, the Southern India Chamber of Commerce, which was a very important organization, a member of the FICCI. And, you know, and G.T. Birla and Walchand, Hirachand, Thakurdas, all these big captains of Indian industry made very conscious effort to placate the Chettiars. In fact, I mentioned that in my book. In 1944-45 session of the FICCI, it was held in Delhi. The presidentship was given to Raja Muthaiya Chettiar, precisely for this reason, to placate the Chettiars, who were an important sort of force in South India. And also because this was the time when their interests had been jeopardized in Southeast Asia. So they wanted to use FICCI as a forum too. But somewhere along the way, you're right, Geeta, and I would agree with Ram also, that I think the Indian state did not really proactively take up the cause of the Chettiars, the vital interests in the overseas. Yeah. So there was this sort of feeling that they had been let down.
Nagaraj, please. Yeah. Nagaraj, बोलिए.
Yeah, thanks, Das. Thank you, Raman. Congratulations for the book.
Thanks,
I have two minor questions and queries.
Yeah.
One is the rise of cotton spinning in Coimbatore.
Yes.
My understanding was it's more from the supply side. You had a hydroelectric power coming up in 1900s, and then the cost of power was very low, and textile spinning is a labor energy intensive industry, and therefore the industry gravitated towards that. Either not more from the supply side. I thought then I would like your comment on that. And I think a lot of the weaving came up much later. That's my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, that's one point. Second point is, in your research, did you come across, or did you try to make any comparison between, say, Chettiars and Brahmin capitalists? I mean, you had if I'm not mistaken, you had a number of Brahmin capitalists, which also flourished after independence. So, if there is any difference between the performance of these two communities, community capitalists, or were they similar? So I think that would throw a light on a lot of what you have been saying. That was my second query. I stop here. Thank you, Raman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Nagaraj. Yeah. As regards the spinning sector in Coimbatore, you're right. The Paikara power supply, availability of cheap power through Paikara hydroelectric power system was a major factor. But let's remember, Nagaraj, that Paikara really is commissioned only in 1933-34. Till then, they were using what do you call this oil-based engines.
Okay.
Oil-based engines. So, so even before 1933, that is what, in fact, my next project, Nagaraj, is precisely on Coimbatore.
Okay, great.
I'm just, in fact, it's all there. I'm going to start work very soon. So that's the next project. It's a I'm looking at the history of a tier 2 town. And I want to get it out quickly before I'm too old to be able to really do this kind of work. So that's my next project. And I would love to discuss this with you so the point that I was making, that even before Paikara is established, there was a flood of investment. So it was not just power. Of course, power was important. It was also the availability of cheap raw cotton. Yes. And availability of a very important factor. And this is where I think we need to take, I keep saying that comparative perspective is so important. This is precisely the point when the Bombay industry is in a crisis. And the deglomerating tendencies operating in Bombay. So many of the sick Bombay mills, the machinery from sick Bombay mills was available for sale. So many of the Coimbatore initial cotton mills were set up by using the Bombay mill machinery. So cheap mill machinery was another major factor. Cheap labor, cheap mill machinery, cheap raw material, and of course, lastly, the Paikara. So it is a combination of these three which really resulted in the boom that you see. As far as the Chettiars and Brahmins are concerned, now let's see there are two varieties of Brahmins. One is, of course, the Kalladai-Kurchi Brahmins, who were traditionally moneylenders, but operated within a very small sphere of geographical space. uh, they're they're not comparable with the Chettiars in terms of the scale of operation. Okay, so you you don't see them moving into industry at this point of time. It's really uh, they do set up a bank. Uh, the India Cements Group, Shankar Linga Iyer, he's probably the first Brahmin to move into uh, a capital intensive industry like cement. So that's in 1945-46. He sets up India Cements in Tirunelveli, in a place called Tadiyuth in Tirunelveli. And then, of course, thanks to C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, uh, his association with C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, he invests also in Travancore Cements in Alleppey. So these are the two sort of things. But they're not really comparable in terms of the scale and size, of some of the large Chettiar firms. So, and then the auto sector is much later. I mean, T.V. Sundaram Iyengar is essentially in the tertiary sector, running transport companies at this point of time. So he goes into manufacturing post-independence only in a big way. In a small way, he does in the 40s, basically manufacturing charcoal-based combustible engines at the wartime when there was major rationing of fuel. So they were thinking of alternate sources of fuel. So you had TVS doing some import substitution at this point of time, but they were really small at this time. It is really after independence that they grow. Who are the other groups? The auto sector, of course, all of them emerge post-independence, whether it's Gopalakrishnan with United Motors, TVS, Rane, all of them, all these Brahmin groups emerge post-independence, not very comparable with the Chettiars at this point of time. I mean, 30s, 40s and all. So who are the other Brahmins? I talked about India Cements, of course. They are big because they are from Kalade-Kochi and they had access to, they had promoted a bank. So through their money lending business and then the bank, they move into, they had that kind of money to move into manufacturing in a big way. But the others do so after independence.
Thank you. Thank you, Raman.
Kiran, please.
Yes, good evening, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So this question is related to overcoming information asymmetries. So the Weberian explanation for the success of Parsis or Marwadis is one of the reasons is because of their minority in existence, which confronts them to a very strong communal bonding that has resulted in a very strong business community. So you just mentioned something about the Chettiar Association. You also mentioned South Indian Chamber of Commerce. So were these responses or partly initiatives to initiate such a community bonding that would result in business prosperity, or do we see something different in the case of the Chettiars? On how do they beat information asymmetries, especially dealing overseas with import-export business. You also mentioned something that there were a lot of efforts to destabilize this business of the Chettiars. So how did they overcome is the question. Thank you so much.
Then the caste associations gave way to, sorry, they had caste panchayats, then caste panchayats, the next metamorphose into caste associations. In fact, the first Chettiar caste association was set up as early as 1912 in Madras. That was the first caste association of their own. And this was essentially promoted at this point of time to in a sense, these were lobbies, shall we say, pressure groups, because they had to deal with the state, with the colonial state. So the association was, in a sense, a forum which enabled them to project their demands and, seek a hearing from the state. Likewise, you have other associations coming in, but the point comes when the associations give way to chambers of commerce. For instance, you had chambers of commerce coming up in Malaysia. In fact, Malaysia, Nattukottai Chettiars Chamber of Commerce. So the association gave way to chambers of commerce, which are much more specialized. having to deal with issues relating to trade. Then you have the South India Chamber of Commerce, which was in fact a body representing South Indian commerce and industry based in Chennai. But it was largely dominated by the Chettiars, especially a certain group of Chettiars, as much as it was alleged that FICCI was largely controlled by the Marwadis. I mean, that was the allegation. That's why Tatas kept away from the FICCI. Tatas were never members of the FICCI. They were members of ASSOCHAM, but not members of FICCI. So that was the situation. I hope I've managed to.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Any other questions, please? Briefly, any more questions? Looks like we had a really great event this evening with someone like Raman. I think we really started with a very interesting book. And
can I say something?
Mr. Kabir, please mute. So let me thank Raman, of course, for the very interesting book, the discussion, and also his eye for great details. I mean, I also had some personal questions, but then maybe I'll ask later. Then excellent, very beautifully presented discussion by Ram Mohan, and then of course a very erudite audience who asked several questions. So this was a really fulfilling event for all of us. It is also a kind of an, though online, it's a kind of a virtual get together for all of us without all the small little things that could have happened in the evenings had it been a physical event. But thanks everyone, and particularly I must thank on behalf of the CDS Alumni Association, its president Sundari, very dynamic secretary Beena, so who really did a lot of work to make it a success. And the two individuals I must mention who are not part of the CDS Executive Association, but then Emmanuel from the CDS and Gareth, so who also helped us in sort of, I think this event has been recorded, so which will be available for the posterity. So that's a great thing that they did. And many thanks, everyone. Have a great evening and day ahead. Enjoy Sunday tomorrow. And we'll have many more such events lined up.
Can I have the word, Cup?
Yeah, please.
Before you wind up. I need
please.
I didn't thank him sufficiently for all those beautiful words you said about me. Thank you very much. I was really touched. And also Ram especially for the manner in which he summarized my book. I couldn't have done that. I mean, he summarized it so beautifully. And so I'm really grateful. And it's so nice, I mean, tomorrow, Keshab, it's a homecoming for me, to get to at least see everybody and listen to all my dear friends from CDS, because CDS has always been a family for me. I mean, this book owes CDS a lot, I mean, it took shape there. So thanks a lot, Keshab, Sundari, Beena, and all the others, Ram particularly. Thanks.
Sundari, why don't you please have the last word, and that's how we'll sort of end it, please.
Okay, thank you. What a fascinating evening of learning. Thank you, Raman and Ram Mohan. And also, to all of you who raised such interesting questions for making this webinar so engaging. I didn't know how time flew. I hope that what we learned today about many things, but especially about the role of caste and community relationships and cultural factors in economic development will inspire further engagement with these issues in economic research being done by CDS and by its alumni. Thanks again, and hope to see all of you and many more of you in future CDS events, CDSAA events. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.